Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the invitation to express the Commission viewpoint on these negotiations. I'd like to maybe kick off the discussions taking a step back, and we can discuss the details of the texts in the second round of this session. The Commission tabled its proposal 18 months ago. And the main purpose of the proposal was to find regulatory responses to problems identified during the financial crisis, which occurred now 10 years ago. That is why we propose to introduce major international standards into EU law, standards which are very much needed if we are finally to address the weaknesses identified during the crisis. Excessive leverage, excessive reliance on wholesale short-term funding, and let's say inappropriate rules in the area of trading. 10 years after the crisis, well, we are not there yet. We haven't implemented the new standards. And therefore, the Commission is somewhat worried looking at the pace of the negotiations, both in the Council and also in the Parliament. We think it is really urgent now that the trilogues can start. Hugh, you mentioned the finalization of Basel III in your introduction. I think it is important to distinguish the two packages. As I said, the package which occupies us today is about essentially responding to weaknesses identified during the crisis. The package recently agreed by the Basel Committee is about introducing new frameworks for credit risk and for operational risk, notably because of perceived problems linked to the use of internal models in these two areas, credit risk and operational risk. So we very much agree with Mr. Karas that we should maintain a separation between the two packages. We should deal with the banking package now, which is evidently difficult enough. And then we need a very thorough impact assessment to assess the economic impact of the Basel III finalization agreed in the Basel Committee in view of a legislative proposal by the Commission in 2020. And that would take place also building on the work that EBA should carry out to help the Commission assessing the true impact of the finalization of Basel III. So that's one word of context that I wanted to share with you. The second word of context that I'd like to express has to do with banking union. I mean, it is important to put this banking package in the banking union context to advance on the issue of banking union and to have an effective banking union in place in a few years' time. We need to move forward together, both on risk reduction and risk sharing. The two need to go hand in hand, and the proposals that we have made represent a major step towards reducing risks in the banking sector in Europe. In this regard, they represent indeed the solid foundation that Mr. Karas alluded to, and which we need in order to have risk sharing within the banking union. But this importance of the package for banking union, we feel, is sometimes somewhat forgotten by the various negotiators. Those who want banking union are sometimes apparently not willing to compromise sufficiently, or are sometimes ready to water down certain standards without having in mind then that risk sharing will be made more difficult afterwards. And on the other side, those that insist very much on risk reduction, well, they don't always seem to be very much in a hurry to conclude the negotiations in order to have risk reduction actually really in place 10 years after the crisis. So I think both sides really need to remember what is at stake here and conclude the negotiations swiftly. Of course, when it comes to risk reduction, we need to do things in a balanced manner. It is important to determine where we put the cursor. In the Commission proposal, we tried to table a faithful, but also where needed, smart implementation of FSB and Basel Committee standards. We are ready, of course, to look at the possible strengthening of certain standards, which apparently is seen as important by a number of negotiators. But we should do that without creating distortions. And there are a number of distortions which we should avoid. First, distortions within the single market. We need to avoid competitive disadvantages that could affect some banks vis-à-vis others. We need to look at funding costs of banks. It's one thing to strengthen very much certain standards, but we should also pay attention as to what this is going to cost for the banks concerned. So the right balance needs to be found here. And finally, and this was mentioned already, we need to look at the international dimension. We want to strengthen our banking system. At the same time, we need to make sure that we maintain a true level playing field globally. Risk reduction is important. That is why the Commission has proposed recently to go even further in the area of risk reduction with its package on non-performing loans, which is an issue which is seen by many as weighing on the solidity of the banking sector in certain member states. We have proposed a legislative proposal in order to make sure that banks set aside enough money in order to cater for loans that become non-performing within their balance sheet. And we also have made another proposal, in order to have more efficient secondary markets so that NPLs can be taken out more effectively and more swiftly out of banks' balance sheet. So we look forward now to the start of the negotiations in Council and Parliament on these two proposals. But of course, it is very important in our view that we do not delay the banking package, which is our subject for today. The priority should be given to that package. But of course, we hope that there can be also quick, fast progress on these two NPL-related proposals. But of course, within banking union, we need a balanced situation between risk reduction and risk sharing. I think it's fair to say that a lot has been done and continues to be done on risk reduction, but very little has been done so far on risk sharing. One important step forward has been taken, namely the commitments to fund the Single Resolution Fund. That is something that we welcome, but it is the only true materialization of the agreement by member states to establish a true banking union where there is not only risk reduction and risk sharing. So we need to go beyond that now urgently. First, with a backstop to the Single Resolution Fund. There is an agreement to have 55 billion euros within the Single Resolution Fund. That's good, but it is clearly not enough in order to cater for a major banking crisis. So we need a credible, fiscally neutral backstop. And second, of course, we need to make progress on EDIS. The Commission, late last year, has made a number of proposals in order to facilitate the discussions on EDIS. We hope that they can form the basis of an agreement in the Council and the Parliament. We have proposed in particular to distinguish between liquidity assistance and genuine sharing of losses. And we have also proposed that before moving to a genuine sharing of losses between member states, there would be some conditionality put into place with, for example, an asset quality review to make sure that NPLs have been sufficiently eliminated in those member states where they still are a problem. So I think everything has been tabled, everything is in place so that discussions resume and move forward on EDIS. Now, the June Council will be, of course, critical for banking union. It is very urgent that we give a sense to the markets, to the banking sector, and also to our international partners as to when banking union will be completed and as to what banking union is going to look like in a steady state. We believe in the Commission that there's a real issue of credibility here. We very much hope, and we are working very hard to make sure that the June European Summit is a success. But for that to happen, a prerequisite indeed is an agreement in Council and in Parliament respectively on the package. And we therefore urge the negotiators both in Council and Parliament to achieve that in the coming weeks. Thank you.